Hi, David. Welcome to our talk today. UNSA Vienna from this side. I'm Angela Doranovic Avaria. I'm the content coordinator of UNSA Vienna. And I'm glad to welcome you today, Friday, 18th of December, on the International Migrants Day. As you probably know, today we try to raise awareness on the importance of migration, international migration, and the challenges that migrants face when they're traveling to other countries. And I'm glad to have you on board, because it would be nice to hear your opinions about migration, and also like with some reference to the current situation of migrants. So let me just introduce our speaker, David Albrich. He's the coordinator of the Platform for a Human Asylum Policy and activist on Left Turn, and now also working in the Workhilfe Austrias. So David, welcome. Hi.
Hello. Hi.
Hi. So I was going to ask you, what do you think about the relationship between international migration and environment? It is quite well known that there is a relation and the connection between climate change and migration. How would you describe this kind of connection, and what's your opinion and thoughts about it?
Well, thanks for the invitation first. And I want to begin with that to say something very fundamental, that migration is something that is part of us all in the modern era, in the modern times. It's nothing new. It's something that we experienced over the last decades, if not 200, 300 years. And the interconnection between migration and the climate crisis, global warming, should concern us very, very much. I mean, recent studies show that the effects of climate change, the heating up of the world, will have tremendous effects on people's lives, on their work, and so on. A recent study shows, for example, that now at the moment 1% of the world's population live in hot zones, and by the year 2070, this number could rise up to 19%. So this shows you just how much this influences us all over the coming decades. If you just think of the rising sea levels, if you think of how weather extremes influence people's lives, floodings, droughts, and so on. And we could already have seen, I mean, effects of these, how political conflicts were driven also by the climate crisis. If you look at, because we have 10 years of the Arab Spring at the moment, how the fertility rates, for example, of peasants influenced the anger of people in Egypt, in Syria, fueling the public rebellion in these kind of states. So it's very serious what we're facing in the next decades.
Yeah, for sure, I agree. And yeah, obviously, as climate change is like getting worse and worse, will probably like have a negative impact on migration, as also like, I guess, the number of people who are migrating is increasing due to climate change again. So yeah, I mean, like, obviously we all know that one of the biggest crisis of our times, I mean, like in the last year, is the COVID-19 pandemic. And I was interested in asking you, how is was the COVID-19 somehow, or how was did this influence migration and migrants? Did it have any impact, like negative, on migration? what's your opinion about it?
I mean, the situation for refugees and migrants was already disastrous before the pandemic. And what studies showed is that with the COVID-19 pandemic, this situation really worsens for people. When what is all over the media at the moment, the situation for people who were living in the camp of Moria, now in Karatepe on the Greek island of Lesbos. Studies show, for example, from the International Rescue Committee, that people with psychotic problems, this number has risen by 71%. People who hurt themselves, these numbers have risen by 66%. So what the COVID-19 pandemic does is worsening the situation, an already tremendous, awful situation for people, for example, in the camps. But it has more to do with, when you look at migration on a world scale, is that countries and governments already were trying before the pandemic, preventing people to get from one country to another. And what we've seen with COVID-19 is that the restrictions for people to migrate were even harder. So it was harder for people to seek refuge in other countries, to migrate, to have a life where they can really have, I mean, better conditions. So this is also has a tremendous impact, I would say, on migration.
Sure. And how did, for example, the Austrian government react on this situation? What was the reaction on, for example, like measures that were implemented by the Austrian government, considering the migrants, I mean, the migration and the COVID-19?
I mean, the Austrian government, like other governments in the world, are confronted with a multiple crisis at the moment, not just the pandemic, but also an economic crisis, and also the climate crisis. And what the government did is, of course, like other countries, they closed the borders, containing the pandemic, and so on. But what is really interesting is that we now face a crisis of political trust in different countries, especially here in Austria, where people are angry at the government as the pandemic continues. And what is very striking is that now the Chancellor, Sebastian Kurz, just a few weeks ago, came up with this narrative that we now experience the second wave of the pandemic in Austria because of the migrants, because of migrants from the West Balkan, because of migrants from Turkey, without any scientific evidence. On the contrary, the science shows us that we have an exponential curve already in the beginning of summer in June. And Sebastian Kurz is just picking out some kind of travelers in August in 2 weeks and saying they are responsible now for the second wave. So you see how in times of crisis that governments are using scapegoating, racism against migrants, against refugees, to sustain the system, to sustain the status quo.
Yeah, for sure. They're like trying to blame refugees and migrants of COVID-19, which is obviously not true, but it's just, I think, like our responsibility, and we cannot blame one category of people, obviously. And yeah, I mean, I can consider myself migrant, so I should also be responsible, but I don't think I am. So we are all responsible of this. So yeah, thank you. And also, what is there like any relationship between gender-based violence and gender-based killings and migration? Because as we know, episodes of gender-based violence, femicide, especially, are especially targeted to probably like women who are who have like less, like a few, like less income, or like less educated. Therefore, I was wondering whether you think there is any like special or like an evident connection between gender-based violence and migration.
Mm. On the actual migration, I would say studies also show that that women are more affected for different reasons, affected by violence, for people who they are dependent on to get into another country, to be smuggled, and also and all that kind of stuff. And when we look at just the reports, what is happening in Libya, for example, I mean, there are camps funded by the European Union, funded by our governments, where people are put into the camps, and especially women are confronted with sexual slavery. And this is in the 21st century we are experiencing. And I think that also now with the COVID-19 situation, where it's harder for people to travel because of all the restrictions, all these are putting more and more pressure on women and female migrants. But it's not just for people who, for women who are actually migrating, but also women who migrated maybe in the past, or their parents. So women with migration background are more affected because of the COVID-19 crisis. Where the percentage of women who are working in hospitals, in nursing homes, and so on, is much higher, and they have a higher risk of getting exposed to the coronavirus, and so on. We should also think of this in a way, because it's also it was a very hard situation for women just before the pandemic, and also the pandemic now worsens the situation for women with migration background already in the past.
Yeah, for sure. I think there was for sure like it worsened the situation for women and for gender-based violence, even though there is not, I mean, like they still cannot prove that there was like an increase of deaths, in number of deaths of women during the COVID-19. This is still unsure and probably cannot be proven by data and results. But so yeah, as a final question, what do you think can be tools to prevent these challenges or obstacles that migrants are facing during either during their journey and once arriving in the hosting countries, and how, for example, like better policies either like at European level as well as country level can improve the situation?
First to say, I think we should have a look at what the governments, especially here in Europe, are doing at the moment. Because in the last years, we could see from the Interior Minister in Italy, Matteo Salvini, what Orban in Hungary is doing, but also the Chancellor here in Austria, Sebastian Kurz, and the Conservative Party, is they are trying to build up the Fortress Europe. That is still, I mean, they are building it for 20, 25 years now, and it's getting harder for migrants and refugees to come to Europe. And we have to say it's a mass grave what they did. It's a mass grave in the Mediterranean, what they're producing. And now it's even that they want to accelerate this by on the European level discussing a new migration pact that legalizes a lot of the unlawful procedures and activities they're already doing, like pushing back migrants and so on and so on. And they're trying to put that in the new pact. So what we are going to do about this? I think we have to name all these measures and oppose them, of course. But we really have to build new alliances, new new forms of united fronts, if you like, of different kind of initiatives, groups, bringing them together to build a movement. And what was so striking for me is to see that the development of the Fridays for Future movement of last year, coming out of we want to do something about the climate crisis. We have to tackle this. I mean, this is so serious what is happening. And over the last months, you could really see how people, activists in the movement already see, okay, what is happening with migrants, with refugees. It's a massive problem. They were calling for protests, for demonstrations in solidarity with refugees when the Moria camp in September burned down. At the same time, climate activists joined the Black Lives Matter movement with 50,000 people going onto the streets this year. And so you can see how kind of a glimpse of what is possible if we link these different kind of movements together, so that we then are stronger also to increase to reach a better condition for refugees and for migrants. This is the task, I would say, for the next year, for 21. If we can manage this, we in our platform for Human Asylum Policy, we are trying to bring different forces together. We're working together with Fridays for Future, with system change and climate change here in Austria. We're also internationally connected, and I hope we can do this.
Yes, sure. This is the resolution for 2021. And also, I think, like during the COVID-19, obviously the protests on the street were very reduced a lot, right? So how did the activism change due to COVID-19?
Yeah, of course, we had to adapt a little bit our protest. And in the beginning, it was hard because, people were just not sure, can I go out on a protest and so on. We wrote a long article on our website, how to go on a protest during a pandemic. And it's called Borders Down and Masks Up. It's possible.
So we should encourage people to read the article and go on the street, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's very easy. Just keep distance, put on a mask, and if you are one of the vulnerable groups or so, really think of, is it good for me to go on a protest, or maybe then should I stay at home, or seek a place in a protest, in a demonstration where not many people gathering and so on. I think this is some kind of a good response to it, because we cannot afford to stop protesting in these serious times of crisis.
Sure. Is there no way to protest online?
Yeah, there are. I mean, we have every year on the International Day Against Racism in March, we are normally going out on the streets. And this year we did an online demo.
All right.
And it was really great because the responses was so massive. Next year we are going again onto the streets, if possible, on the 20th of March, together with different groups. And until then, we also have online talks we're also doing discussions, and it's called Say It Loud Talks, where we have different kind of issues also coming up. The last issue is on the situation for migrants on the West Balkan route, especially in Bosnia, where they face violence and so on. This is a kind of trying to bring together protests on the streets in the real world with kind of awareness raising, with protest online.
That's great. So, David, thank you for your very inspiring words.
Thank you.
Yeah, and yeah, for people who are interested in joining your protest, I would suggest them to get in touch with you and with the platform, right?
Thank you very much for having me, and
of course,
what you're doing.
Bye, David.
Bye-bye.